So welcome back. Just before we discuss the introductory video on hypersensitivity, so now we'll start the first part of hypersensitivity. It is the type 1 hypersensitivity. Type 1 hypersensitivity. Right? What is exactly type 1 hypersensitivity? Among all the 4 types of hypersensitivity, type 1 hypersensitivity is the most common hypersensitivity and the most dangerous hypersensitivity. Any clinic you go, and if you find a patient with hypersensitivity, the 90% of the cases you find is type 1 hypersensitivity. So first of all, who is the main role that is playing in this type 1 hypersensitivity? It is nothing but your mast cell. You know, the structures that are embedded or present within the mast cell. When you take this as your mast cell contains a nucleus, right? It also contains some granules, or you can also say these are vesicles which are embedded inside with granules, right? These are vesicles containing some granules. These black dots which I am representing here are the granules that are present in the vesicles of mast cells. And these are different type of granules, right? So this is a mast cell. The other name for the mast cell is mastrocyte, and the other name for the mastrocyte is labrocyte. So no one is going to ask you the remaining names, so just remember this as your mast cell, because this mast cell is the main cell that is playing role in this type 1 hypersensitivity. Now, as I told you, this is your nucleus, right? And these are your vesicles. So these vesicles are containing heparin, as you have studied before. It contains heparin. It also contains histamine, and additionally it contains some special structures. These special structures are leukotriene B4, leukotriene C4, leukotriene D4. It is leukotriene B4, leukotriene C4 and leukotriene D4. These are also the particles of the granules or the chemical substances that are present in the vesicles of the mast cells, right? So now, what exactly happens in hypersensitivity type 1 is that whenever an allergic particle, we generally call this allergic particle as allergen, right? Whenever this allergen enters into your body, and this allergen activates this mast cell. So remember one thing, this mast cell is activated only when there is an entry of allergen particle. And remember one more thing, that this mast cell releases this heparin, histamine, LB4, LC4 and LD4 only under activation by any allergen or something else. If it is not activated, then it no more releases these all structures. It releases these structures only when the mast cell is activated, right? So when an allergen or an allergic particle enters into your body, and when it activates your mast cells, what happens is that exactly allergen activates the mast cells, and mast cell has a nucleus in it. This nucleus is in turn activated, and it sends messages to these vesicles, so that the vesicles come and fuse to the membrane of the mast cell and release its content such as heparin, histamine, LB4, LC4 and LD4. Now we will discuss what are the conditions or what are the pathologies that are related when there is a release of heparin, histamine or these structures. You know, heparin is an anticoagulant, right? Next, coming to histamine. Whenever histamine is released, it performs two functions. One is vasodilatation and the next is vasodilatation, vasodilatation, right? Vasodilation, and the next is smooth muscle contraction. So there are two functions that are performed by this histamine when it is released into the tissue fluids. One is the vasodilatation and the other one is smooth muscle contraction. What exactly happens when histamine is released into the blood fluids? What exactly happens is that it performs vasodilatation. The vessels of our body, any vessel you take, the vessels of our body, it gets dilated. When it gets dilated, the permeability of the vessel is increased. When the permeability of the vessel is increased, all the tissue fluid, all the particles or all the fluid that is present in the intravascular compartment released or escapes into the extravascular compartment. When it escapes, when such thing happens, there is a formation of swelling which we also call it as edema. Right? In type 1 hypersensitivity patients, you find edema due to vasodilatation. Next, smooth muscle contraction. For suppose if a patient is having asthma, if there is a release of histamine, definitely he will have smooth muscle contraction. There is bronchoconstriction. When there is a bronchoconstriction, the patient feels more difficulty to breathe, and this bronchoconstriction due to smooth muscle contraction may be lethal and lead to death, mainly in patients with asthma. Right? Now, coming to LB4, LC4 and LD4, what are these molecules which are newly heard now? These are chemotactic agents. Chemotactic. These are chemotactic agents. What it exactly does? When the mast cell is activated, these particles or these molecules or these chemical substances are released into the bloodstream, and these substances, chemotactic in the sense, it attracts the remaining cells such as neutrophils, right? Such as basophils and such as macrophages. It activates neutrophils, basophils and macrophages so that all these three types of cells come near these mast cells. When they come near this mast cell releases chemical molecules onto that and destroy these cells even, causing autoimmune deficiency or autoimmune disorders. Right? This all what happens in type 1 hypersensitivity. Now, as I told you, unless and until the mast cell is activated, it does not release heparin, histamine and all these structures. Who is activating this mast cell? I also told you that allergen is a particle, any particle that enters into your body and starts hypersensitivity reactions. That particle is considered to be an allergen. Right? Whenever allergen enters into your body, it causes activation of mast cells and led to all these health processes. Right? Now, question is that, does all allergens affect the entire population or not? First of all, what are allergens? As I told you in the previous video, the pollen grains, the dust particles, the dander or the animal fur, all of these are considered as allergens. Still there are many such as seafood or vegetables or so and so. So all these considered as allergens. Does these allergens affect the entire population or no? The answer is no, because allergens affect only 20% of the total population. 80% of the total population are free from allergens. Why this 20% of the population is affected with allergens? Why? It is because of one reason, that is genetic predisposition. I'll come back to the mast cell again. So, as I discussed the disorders or the pathologies that are related with the mast cells when it releases its granules. So, first of all, this must be activated. To activate this, we need allergen. Right? 80% of the population is free from allergens. They are not affected by these allergens. Whenever these allergens such as dust particles or pollen grains enter into their body, their autoimmune system or their immune system do not show any harm to those allergens. It is for 80% of the population. The remaining 20 are affected. Why? Why these remaining 20 are affected? It is due to genetic predisposition. Predisposition. What is exactly meant by genetic predisposition? First, suppose when you take out a cell, right? You know, cell contains chromosome, and even this chromosome contains DNA inside it. You know, DNA also contains small genes that code for different types of proteins. For suppose I will take this part of the DNA, because this part of the DNA containing genes are coding for the production of this part. This part of the gene sequence of this chromosome is coding for the production of T helper cell. T helper cell, right? Or we can also say T helper 0 or naive cell, right? Now this T helper 0 or naive cell, by the action of interleukin 4, it is getting converted into T helper 2 cells, right? This part of the chromosome that is coding for T helper 0, by the action of interleukin 4, it is converted into T helper 2 cell. This T helper 2 cell activates your B cells. B cells are nothing but the B lymphocytes. What happens when the B lymphocytes are activated? They convert into plasma cells. B lymphocytes are converted into plasma cells. What is the main function of plasma cells? Release of antibodies, right? Now, what is exactly genetic predisposition? This process occurs under normal physiological conditions. Under normal physiological conditions, this is the process that is occurring. But genetic predisposition, what is exactly meant by genetic predisposition? If there is a mutation for this chromosome at this point, then there is abundant production of T helper 2 cells. When there is abundant production of T helper 2 cells, these T helper 2 cells keep on firing on B cells, so that B cells must produce more and more plasma cells. When more and more plasma cells are produced, it in turn produces more and more antibodies. So what are the main antibodies that are taking part in this hypersensitivity is IgE, right? So more and more IgE antibodies are produced, right? Now what happens when IgE antibodies are produced in excessive amount? Now again we'll go back with the mast cell and discuss how this IgE antibody affects the mast cell, so that the mast cell is releasing all those hell out of there. So this is your mast cell, right? And your mast cell is having the nucleus here, right? And these are the vesicles that are embedded within a mast cell, and there are two different types of granules. Three different types. One are histamines, and the other one is heparin, and there are also leukotriene B4, leukotriene C4, leukotriene D4, right? One important thing which I love to mention is that on the surface of the mast cell, right? On the surface of the mast cell, there is a receptor like this. This receptor is named as IgE receptor, right? This receptor is named as IgE receptor. IgE receptor. When there is, due to mutation, I told you in genetic predisposition, there is the mutation of the gene that produces T helper 2 cells. When there is mutation of such gene, more and more IgE antibodies are produced. When more and more IgE antibodies are produced, these IgE antibodies come and bind to this receptor. How do they bind to this receptor? This is one IgE antibody coming and binding to the receptor, and this is one more IgE antibody coming and binding to the receptor. So by seeing this diagram, you need to understand that there are two IgE antibodies that are coming and binding to this receptor, that is the IgE receptor. If there is binding of one IgE antibody, then this mast cell is not activated. Mast cell is activated only when these two IgE antibodies get binded to this IgE receptor. Now, when you come across your MCQs, they will be asking which portion of the antibody binds to this IgE receptor. It is the constant portion. See, as you see here, these hands of the antibody which are present, these constitute, or these are designated as variable portion. Variable portion. Right? So let me draw it here in an enlarged fashion so that it would be, see, when you take this as your antibody, right? So this part of your antibody becomes the variable region. Variable, this is called as the variable region of your antibody. And this part is called as the constant region of your antibody. Constant region of your antibody, right? So antibody attaches to this IgE receptor at the constant portion. You look at it, right? The constant portion, the IgE antibody is getting attached to this IgE receptor. So this is one MCQ which you come across by doing the MCQs on hypersensitivity 1, right? So these two are IgE antibodies. Now, how this mast cell is activated, how these antibodies are activating this mast cell? There must be some cross-linking between these two IgE antibodies. Who forms the cross-linking? As I told you before, allergen is the particle that activates this mast cell. So allergen, if this is the barrier of your body, allergen from the, for suppose this is allergen entering into your body and forms the cross-link here. This allergen forms the cross-link between two IgE antibodies. The moment when allergen forms the cross-link between these two IgE antibodies, these IgE antibodies activate this receptor. When this receptor has got activated, this receptor sends the impulses to one structure that is present within the mast cell. It is nothing but called as cyclic GMP. Inside the mast cell, you find cyclic guanosine monophosphate, right? Cyclic guanosine monophosphate. This is the structure that is present within the mast cell. So when the receptor sends impulses to the cell, this cyclic GMP is activated. When the cyclic GMP is activated, it in turn activates the nucleus of the cell. And nucleus of the cell sends impulses to these granules, the vesicles, so that these vesicles come here, right? And they fuse to the surface of the membrane in this way, and they release their vesicular content, that is the granules, into the tissue fluids, right? If histamine is released, it causes heparin is released, it causes anticoagulation, and if histamine is released, it causes, as I told you, vasodilatation and bronchoconstriction, that is a smooth muscle constriction, right? And if leukotriene B4, leukotriene C4, D4, if they are released, they are chemotactic, so they attract the remaining immune cells and destroy them, right? So this is the entire concept of type 1 hypersensitivity, which is going on in the most of the clinics, right? The next video will be regarding the type 2 hypersensitivity. Thank you.